We're beginning a new series. It's going to be a three-week series that we're going to call He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. And that reminds us, of course, of that old hymn, He's got the whole world in His hands. He's got you and me, brother, you and me, sister. He's got the tiny little baby in His hands. He's got the whole world in His hands. That's our theme. And today what we're going to do is we're going to focus on God in His power, God in His majesty, as well as in His love, as He is working all things for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. During difficult times, and right now this is a difficult time, and it may be, as I said earlier, a personal difficult time for you if you're going through a time, let's say, of divorce, separation, unemployment, maybe you lost your job, an illness. But during times of difficulty, we find that believers will have one of two kinds of statements. I've heard a lot of believers over the past week say, well, we're going through all of this, but God is in control. God is in control. He works all things for the good of those who love Him, and so on and so on. Very true. But there are other voices amongst believers that question God. Where is God? Why is God so unfair? Why is He doing this to me? Does God even exist? And it's particularly to that kind of voice that I want to address this message today. Now, if your voice, if your faith is such that you are saying, I really trust God, God is powerful and God is in control, then what I want us to do is affirm that and reaffirm that and deepen our understanding of that. But particularly, if any of you have been raising those questions or even those very negative comments, where is God and why is God so unfair? I want to particularly focus in on some of your words and your thoughts and your emotions. When I hear that, when I hear people say, God this and God that, and why is God unfair, and why is God doing this, and why is God doing that, and why did He permit this, and why did He permit that, my thoughts go to the book of Job. And I want us to read from the book of Job this morning, verses out of chapter 38. We're not going to have the words up on the screen this morning. Had a few computer difficulties, and so I'm going to read them to you. But if you'd like to read along, we're going to be reading out of Job chapter 38. Not the whole chapter, but some of the verses. And what Job is doing in Job chapter 38 is what God is doing in Job chapter 38 is He is responding to how Job and his three friends have been griping and complaining and debating all the way through the book. It's a very long book. And those of you who know Job, you know very well what was going on. But if you don't know Job, very briefly, Job was a man who was very wealthy. He had all of those things taken away from him. His children died. He lost all of his crops, all of his livestock, and he also lost his health. He had sores all over his body. He was miserable. And all through the book, his three friends are claiming that Job was going through all of this because he had committed some terrible sin. And Job continued to say, no, I haven't. I mean, of course, I'm not perfect, but I have not committed a terrible sin that would lead to all of this. But the friends continue to hammer away at him and say, no, Job, that's the way God operates. You commit some sin, He nails your hide. He's mean to you. And Job continues to come back and argue with them, and then he also argues with God. In fact, there are times that Job says, I wish I had never been born. And finally, at the end of all of that, when we get to chapter 38 and towards the end of the whole book, God comes to Job and his three friends, and basically He says this, who do you guys think you are? Who do you think you are? Here you are debating about me, debating about what I do, how I do it, why I do it, who I am. You're angry, you're upset. You've got theological theories. Job, you're shaking your fist into my face from time to time. Who do you think you are? It's kind of like the flea telling the German shepherd where to walk and what to do. God says, who do you think you are? Don't you realize who I am? And sometimes we forget that. We get so involved in our questioning or perhaps our criticism of God and the way that He's handling the situation, we forget that we are the flea and He is the dog, so to speak. That is, we are the speck and He is the mighty, powerful God. And in Job chapter 38, he talks about the fact that He has been there from the beginning, and even before, of course, and that He is the cause of all things. We're going to begin Job chapter 38, verses 1 through 4. He says, "Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, and He said, 'Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Who do you think you are? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?'" And then jumping over to verse 12. "Have you ever given orders to the morning, or shown the dawn its place?" God says, I'm the one who makes the morning occur, who makes the dawn occur. Have you ever done that, Job? Three friends, have you ever done that? Jumping over to verse 18. "Have you comprehended the vast expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all of this." Verse 25 and following. "Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain, and a path for the thunderstorm, to water the land where no one lives, in uninhabited deserts, to satisfy a desolate wasteland and make it sprout with grass? Does the rain have a father? Who fathers the drops of rain and dew?" Verse 31 through 33. "Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, that is the starry hosts? Can you loosen Orion's belt?" In other words, are you in charge of the stars, Job, and the three friends? Are you? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons? Or lead out the bear that is the design of the stars, lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over earth? So God says, look who you're dealing with. I am God. And in your puniness, you want to debate me? You want to contend with me? Were you there when all of this was made? Oh yeah. In fact, in verse 21, God has a little sarcasm with Job. In verse 21, he says, "Surely you know all of these things, for you were there. You were already born, weren't you, when all the worlds were created? You have lived so many years." God says, "Job, you're a speck. Three friends, you're a speck. You're a flea on the dog. And you want to contend with the mighty God?" I remember many, many years ago, I worked for my father in his bakery, which then became my brother's bakery and is now his son's bakery. But I remember working in that bakery. And I decided that I noticed this and that I thought could be done better, a way that we could perhaps streamline a certain thing. And so I decided, I was 17 years old, I decided to approach my father and tell him how I thought the business ought to be run. Now, at that time, he was about 40 years of age. He had been working in that bakery since he was about 10 years old. And he was there 6 days out of the week. And he had the entire business on his shoulders. But at 17 years of age, I was going to tell him what to do. And I had a little bit of a cocky spirit. And one day he looked into my eye and he said, "If you don't like it, go home." Well, at first I was a little put out. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, he's right. Who am I? At 17 years of age, I had been doing all kinds of very important work there, like scrubbing floors and driving the truck, making deliveries. Boy, that was really highly responsible. And I began to realize, particularly as I got older, I began to realize that I had no right to talk to him that way. And that's the kind of spirit that we have here with Job, with the three friends. And God is saying, do you know to whom you're speaking? Who do you think you are? And I believe that we've got to be very careful. We've got to be very careful when we're shaking our fist into the face of God, when we're saying, why did God disappoint me? And why does God do it this way? And why does God do it that way? He is God. He is God. I believe what we need to realize is that God is working with all of the different people, events, and situations in the world. God is working with it in a way that he's massaging and perhaps even in a good sense manipulating and adjusting all of the things happening so that ultimately they will work out according to his will. Now, it isn't always immediately obvious what he is doing. What we need to keep in mind is that the brokenness in the world is not God's fault. The Bible clearly teaches that the brokenness, the sin, the misery, the war, the hurt, the pain, the divorce, the illness, the disease that is in the world goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve fell. And the Apostle Paul talks about that in Romans 8. He says the whole creation has been frustrated. It's been damaged by human beings, not God, human beings. And what God is doing is he is massaging, he is working with all of those events and people in this world that even though they're fallen and broken and rotten and miserable, especially at certain times, he is trying to make something beautiful. We sang that earlier. He makes all things beautiful in his time. Going back again to the bakery experiences. Now, as I got older, I did actually have some more responsible jobs. And for a period of time, I worked every Friday night, and I made bread. And to begin with, there was this huge pile of dough that came out of the mixer, and it was on the workbench. It was this huge pile of dough. It really had no shape, no form, no beauty. It was just a huge hunk of dough. And it was my job to chop off chunks of that into sizes that would become loaves of bread, and then to work it with my hands, and then put it into the tin, let it rise, and then put it into the oven. Now, today a lot of that is done with machinery, but back in that day, and this was a number of years ago, it was all done by hand. And so I'd chop off a hunk of that dough. I'd work with it. I'd work with that dough. It's one of the reasons my father had such strong hands. He did that for years and years. And so I worked with that dough, and I would shape it, and I would form it, and I would put it into the tin. I would bake it, and it would come out, and then when it would cool, it would get dumped out of that tin, and then it would ultimately get sliced in the slicing machine, put into a wrapper, and put out into the front showcase, looking like a beautiful loaf of bread. It looked very different than that hunk of dough that had been plopped on the workbench. And that's, I believe, one of the ways that we can think about God working with the things that are going on in the world. He is shaping, and he is massaging, and he is taking what really doesn't have much sense or much form or much direction, and when he's finally done with it, he's made it into something beautiful. Did you ever notice in the Bible, in fact, in daily life, how oftentimes the light comes right after what is dark? Something seems so hopeless, And all of a sudden it turns around and it becomes light. You find that in the Bible. Genesis 1, creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And what was there right at the beginning? It says there was darkness and emptiness. And then what did God do? Did he say, okay, it's all very dark, it's all very empty, so let's begin with sort of a dark gray, and then let's move to a lighter gray, and eventually we'll get maybe sort of an off-white or a cream. No, no, no. It was very dark, empty, and God said, let there be light. Dark to light. The Israelites, God's people, were in captivity over 400 years. Things looked to be extremely hopeless, very hopeless. Looked like they were destined to be a slave group for the rest of their existence. And all of a sudden, one day, God raises up this guy named Moses who goes to the Pharaoh and says, let my people go, or else God's going to get you. And Pharaoh said, nope. And God got him. And he finally let the people go. And almost overnight, in fact, well, really, literally overnight, they went from being a slave organization to becoming a nation with laws, with structure, with leadership. And as they were led through that wilderness into the promised land. Joseph, almost killed by his brothers, sold into slavery, into Egypt, ends up in a deep dungeon, in a pit. Looks like he's going to live out his life, his days in this pit. And all of a sudden, again, within days, he goes from the pit to becoming the second most powerful person in Egypt, from dark to light. I was talking to one of our West members this past week on the telephone. From time to time, people not only send notes. Remember, I held up that big stack of envelopes earlier, but they also call on the phone. Thank you very much, or send emails. And this one lady from the West congregation called me up just to chat, say hi, how you doing? She immigrated from the Netherlands, and when she was a child, the German Nazis had invaded and taken the Netherlands captive. And she was telling me how horrible it was. In fact, there was one time that her two brothers were hiding. And if the German soldier that was walking up and down the road would see them, he would blow their head off. And then all of a sudden one day, the Canadian troops rode into her town and liberated her people. Dark to light, just like that. And that's the way that God operates. You ever notice in Psalm 23? Psalm 23 says, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And I wonder how many times you've heard that and you didn't really know what that line meant. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Well, what David is talking about there is that the shepherd, and David was a shepherd, the shepherd would have a rod. It would be probably a very thick, huge hunk of wood that had been shaped and formed into a club, and that was to protect the sheep. It would discipline the sheep, but also protect the sheep. So woe be to the bear or the lion that might try to invade the sheep pen, because it was gonna get that club right between its eyes, or get chased away by the shepherd, and it would know that the shepherd could get it. And so God says, I'm protecting you. My power, my power, my power. The rod, that is a symbol of power and protection. And the staff, it's that pole with the hook on it, with the shepherd's hook, like sometimes we hang plants from it. And that was used to draw the sheep back into the fold if they would wander away. And it was a symbol then of love, of gathering, of restoring the lost sheep, gathering the sheep together, gathering the lost back into the fold. And so the rod and the staff, they comfort me. Your protection as the powerful God, and your loving care, the staff. It comforts me. Comforts me. Now, there are some who won't believe this, either because They've had so much hurt in their life, they can't get past the hurt, or maybe they've become agnostic, that is, they just don't know what to believe, or even atheistic. They don't believe that there is a God. They said, phooey, I don't believe it anymore, or I don't want to believe it. And maybe you've come close to that point. You've said, there's too much wrong and not enough right. There's too much bad and not enough good. Have you ever thought about why you're able to define bad and good as good? Who defined good and bad? You say, well, it's bad if it hurts. No. There's a lot of hurt that isn't bad. When I get my flu immunization, vaccination, yeah, it hurts a little bit. You know, the needle goes into the arm, but that's good. Protects me. And when my father looked at me and he said, if you don't like it, go home, that was good for me. It hurt, but it was good for me. Sometimes the spanking, even though we're not supposed to do that, I guess, but it might hurt, but it's ultimately good. So not all hurt is bad. And not all pleasant things are good. It might feel good to shoot some drugs into the arm or for a period of time to get drunk, but that isn't good. So how do you know the difference between true good and true bad? And Timothy Keller, famous pastor in New York City, has birthed many churches. He talks about this, as does C.S. Lewis in his book, Mere Christianity. But Timothy Keller talks about this in his book, The Reason for God. And by the way, I would recommend this if you're struggling with your faith in God. This is one of the, it's not the only one, but it's certainly one of the very readable and good books. And he talks about that in here, and he says the only reason that you're able to really define good and bad and have a real sense for what is evil and what is good, what is harmful and what isn't harmful, what is productive and hopeful and what isn't, is because God has put a sense in you. It's called conscience. He's put a sense of beauty, a sense of right and wrong in you. And that's an evidence that God exists. You say, well, that's not true. And he talks about arguments against that in this book. Well, that's not true. We just evolved that way. But you know what? You've been blinded by a lot of the logic and perhaps naturalism and humanism of this world. The Apostle Paul talks about that in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 4 through 6, the Apostle Paul says, the gods of this age have blinded the minds of those who don't want to believe, so that they cannot see the light. They cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For what we preach is not ourselves, says the Apostle Paul, but we are preaching Jesus Christ as Lord and ourselves as the Lord's servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, let the light shine out of the darkness, made his light shine in our hearts. Now there's the idea. God has made his light shine in our hearts. Conscience, a sense of beauty, a sense of truth, a sense of right, a sense of wrong, as well as our own sin and need for salvation, our need for Jesus. He's made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God, of his glory, which is displayed in the face of Christ. But Paul says a lot of people don't want to believe it because they've been blinded by the gods of this age. And the gods of this age are the doubters, the naysayers, the scientists who deny the existence of any kind of higher power, the philosophers who argue against any kind of God, as well as the guy that you work with who says religion is stupid and the church is just after your money or whatever. These are the gods of the age, and they blind us to what we find in the book of Job when God says, who do you think you are? I'm God. I am God, and I am massaging and I am manipulating all of the events of your life as well as the lives of people around the world as well as the governments, the governors, all of the nations, to make them ultimately become something good. Like the Canadians marching into the Dutch town to liberate them. And so Timothy Keller in that book, and again, I would really recommend it, The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. If you want more information about it, just shoot me an email or drop me a note, and I'll tell you more about it. Or like in John 17, verse 11. John 17 is called the high priestly prayer. It's where Jesus talks with his heavenly Father, and he prays for their relationship as well as his relationship with his friends, his disciples, and also his relationship with all believers, all people who will become believers. It's an amazing chapter in the Bible, John 17. And in verse 11, Jesus refers to God as Holy Father. Holy Father. Holy, the rod. The God of Job 38. Power. Power. All things under his control. Holy. Distant. Governing from the heavens. Father. A good father. You're a good, good father. A good father who takes the child by the hand. Ravi Zacharias, one of the great, great preachers who, unfortunately, from our perspective, right now has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Ravi Zacharias says in one of the sermons that I listened to in preparation for this morning, he says that there was a good friend of his, a man, very wealthy man, who bought this large, large piece of territory in the Carolinas. It butted up against a deep, deep valley, went down about a quarter of a mile down into the valley with a gorgeous waterfall. And this man brought his son and some friends there one day to look at it, to see the beauty of this piece of land that he just purchased. And the little boy, the son of this father, wanted to run up to the edge and peek over the edge into that deep valley, watching the waterfall gushing down to the bottom, sending it spray up. And the father said, no, you stay here. I'm going to go first and just check it out to see if it's safe. And he went to the edge, and the earth gave way, and the father plunged a quarter of a mile to his death. See, the father didn't say, yeah, kid, why don't you go up to the edge and check it out? If you fall over to your death, okay, then I know I shouldn't go there. No. The father went on ahead. The father really died for his child. Boy, there's a familiar theme. He's a good father. He's a good, good father. He is that powerful one. It says in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 10, he is the strong tower to which we can flee. In the ancient world, if the people living in an ancient village knew that the enemy was coming, they were really scared because most of the enemy armies would slaughter all of the people or take them as slaves. So they were really scared, and so they would build these high towers, and they would flee into the high towers, kind of like in Hagar the Horrible, the comic strip. If Hagar and his guys were coming, the people would flee into the high tower. And God says, I'm the high tower. You can flee into, you see, we don't want a God who is weak. We want a God who is strong, the high tower, but also the Father. And he's going to go to the edge for us, even if it means dying for us. Ravi Zacharias, in that sermon that I listened to, talks about a passage in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. It's just a great passage. I wasn't familiar with it, and I went and studied it. And in that passage, we read about King Jehoshaphat. He was king of Judah, the southern kingdom in Israel, about 800 years before Christ. And he was really scared because 3 nations on the east side of the Dead Sea were going to come and attack him. Now, you talk about fear. They were afraid. because they were much smaller than those three nations together. Nations like Moab and Edom, they were on the west side of the Dead Sea. These nations were on the east side. They were going to come and attack Judah. Jehoshaphat, the king, was really scared. And he got down on his face before the Lord because he knew that his army was not able to defeat those three armies together. He got down on his face before the Lord. And he said, and this is in verses 5 and 6 of 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Then Jehoshaphat in the assembly of Judah and Jerusalem at the temple of the Lord prayed to God, saying, O Lord God of our fathers, are you not the God who is in heaven? Are you not? And then later in the chapter, verse 7, O our God, did you not drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it to us, the descendants of Abraham? And then finally, a little bit farther on in the passage, verses 10 through 12. But now here are the men from Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, those were the three nations, whose territory you would not allow Israel to invade when they came from Egypt, so they turned away from them and did not destroy them. See how they are repaying by coming to drive us out of the possession that you gave us as an inheritance. O our God, will you not judge them? For we have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are upon you. Jehoshaphat says, are you not God? Power, the rod, the tower. Are you not God? And did you not give us this land as you promised? And so will you not deliver us from these enemies? Let's keep those three things in mind, like as we face virus and all of that stuff. Are you not the strong tower, the mighty God? Are you not? Did you not take care of us? Swine flu, World War II, hurricanes and tornadoes, and the illness that dad or mom had. Did you not, and will you not, as we sang earlier, make all things beautiful in your time? Are you not God? Did you not take care of us? Will you not continue to? In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 33, beautiful expression. It says, you will dwell, God says, you will dwell between my shoulders. It's Deuteronomy 33, verse 12. You will dwell between my shoulders. You say, what? Dwell between your shoulders? And the idea there is that a mother in the ancient world would make a hammock out of cloth. It was about 2.5 feet long and about 2 feet wide, with ropes tied on the ends of it. And she would put her baby into that hammock, and she would put the baby in the hammock on her shoulders, and then tie the ropes of the ends of that hammock around her forehead. And then she could do her work and walk around with the baby on her shoulders, protected from the sun in the desert there, protected from wild animals, always close to her and with her, because she was the mom. She was big, the baby is little. And God says, you dwell between my shoulders. I'm big, you're little. Job 38. I'm big, you're little. I'm the strong tower. I'm the rod. But I'm also the mom. Mother's Day, how they have taken care of us. They kept us between their shoulders. And as a mother cares for her children, the good mother, the good mom, the mom of Proverbs chapter 31, verses 10 to the end, the good mom, She is worth far more than rubies. Her children rise and call her blessed. The good mom carries her children between her shoulders, and God says, that's what I do. But we need to step forward in faith into whatever situation we're in. In the last moments, I want you to realize that you've got a God who is powerful and a God who is the father and the mother, the staff dwelling between his shoulders. But you and I have to step forward in faith. You and I have to step forward in faith. Now, I don't know what that means. For example, I have people who are making various comments to me about the church opening up again. I've got some on one side who are saying, now, don't let the church open up too soon. We've got to respect this disease, this virus. We've got to protect our people. I've got people on the other side of the fence saying, open it up. The governor is, this and that, and so on and so forth. Well, we do have to move forward. Exactly how we do that, we as a staff, you saw the staff video before, we do get together and we're talking about it. But exactly how we move forward, that has to be done as we discuss with the advisory pastors, the leaders of our church, our staff. We've got to look carefully at, but we do need to move forward. You, if you're going through divorce, unemployment, whatever, don't be afraid. You've got to step forward. I remember many years ago, when my wife and I were first married, she wanted to go to the grocery store, so we went together, but I didn't feel like going inside, so I sat in the parking lot in the car. Some of you remember this story. Pastor Mark tells this to the recovery crowd oftentimes, and you'll see why as it unfolds. But I sat in the parking lot, and this was long ago when the doors of grocery stores still had handles. And you would have to grab the handle and open the door, and grab the handle to get out, to get in, to get out, grab the handle. They didn't have the electric eye watching you and opening automatically. And I sat there in the car that day, and I realized that grocery store had just put in something brand new. It was a pad of rubber on the ground. And when you stepped on it, the door opened. And so they took the handles off the doors. But you had to step on the pad. And I remember watching an elderly woman walk up to the edge of the pad, and she stood there and she realized the doors had no handles. And I could read her mind. How am I going to get in if the door doesn't have a handle? And I leaned out of my car and I shouted to her and I said, take a step and the door will open. See, that's what we need to do. We need to step forward in faith and the door will open. God will work all things for his good. He is the strong tower. He is God. He is the God of Job 38. And that's the great message that we have. As it says in the book of Isaiah, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring the good news. We bring the good news this morning. God is rod and he is staff. He is mighty tower. He is loving Father, carrying us between his powerful shoulders. And so that's the good news. And so we can proclaim peace and bring good tidings and proclaim salvation. And we can say to all people and to the church, our God reigns. Step forward in faith. I'm not sure how you should do it in whatever your situation is. We are still learning as a church how to step forward in this virus situation. But we all need to step forward and not doubt. And the door will open, and he will make something beautiful in our time and bring light where there has been dark.